I want to raise one of the great repetitive lies that we're hearing often from the Beijing regime. Right now, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on an 8-nation tour of Pacific nations to lock them into secret deals relating allegedly to security engagement and infrastructure. Meanwhile, also travelling from island to island is Australia's Penny Wong, offering all kinds of enticements as well. Now, this is a serious thing to try and keep China at bay and ensure that we have the Pacific Island nations in our tent and not China's. But to say, as we've discovered, that they are not going to build a military base in the Solomon Islands, for instance, goes against everything they've tried to do in places like Vanuatu and North Africa. I won't give you the history lesson, but that's exactly what they've done to ensure that they have power, access to resources, and of course, the ability to use these countries to strike militarily. But the grossest lie is that they're saying, and so does the Solomon Islands Prime Minister, that they're not doing this. That's not part of their security pact. We have no intention at all of doing this. Well, firstly, Honiara is prohibited from speaking publicly about the deal without China's permission, so they are pathetically tongue-tied from telling the truth. But more importantly, and secondly, as I revealed exclusively last month, we have solid written evidence that building a military base there is exactly what China is aiming to do. In a letter dated September 2020, Provincial Premier Leslie Kukola was told by the Chinese state-owned Avic International Project Engineering Company that it intended to, quote, develop naval projects on leased land for the People's Liberation Army Navy in the Isabel province. There it is, black and white. From a Chinese infrastructure company and one of the biggest. They turn over $280 million annually. The regime are a pack of liars who, before the end of this month, will have likely signed up 8 Indo-Pacific nations to lucrative contracts which will have them in debt both financially and militarily. They are not roaming the region to feed the poor. They are there to establish access to resources, extend their influence, and in the event of war, have military bases. And all that stands in the way of this juggernaut right now is Penny Wong. Heaven help us. So let's turn to an expert on all things Chinese and the Pacific to get his take on what's been a massive first week with this new government. Joining me now from Melbourne is a former Australia-China Council scholar, Andrew Phelan. Andrew, thank you for your time. It's an unprecedented move from China, a 10-day, 8-country tour of the Pacific, making all kinds of promises. How successful will China be, do you think?
It certainly is, Chris. You and I spoke about the Solomons, I think, about a year ago on Sky. And what's happened now, I think, has taken everyone by surprise. And I think the lesson there is to anticipate China's next move rather than react to it when it happens. But at the moment, we've got a kind of new competition, and get ready for a couple of acronyms, between the IPEF, which is Biden's new initiative, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and the China-Pacific Island countries' common development vision. You're quite right, they use that sort of joint cooperative sort of language. How's this all going to pan out? It's very ambitious, and I should add that Timor-Leste off on the northwest coast is also on Wang Yi's itinerary, so it's not just the Pacific. But it's basically game on at the moment. So Fiji has just announced they're signed up to the Biden agreement. The president of the Federated States of Micronesia has written a letter to all members of the Pacific Forum imploring them not to sign up to this. It's not a legally binding agreement. That's beside the point. The point is that once the infrastructure and personnel are in place, they're going to be very hard to remove.
And just
to be specific in terms of the details, Chris, if I may, I'd just like to read out one excerpt from the detail of this agreement. This is from the President of the Federated States of Micronesia. He says that the Chinese seek to control ownership of our communications infrastructure, customs quarantine, hence the terms smart customs and smart quarantine, for the purpose of biodata collection, mass surveillance in those residing in and entering and leaving our islands, ostensibly to occur in part through cybersecurity partnership. This is like hiring a fox to guard your hen house.
What a joke, what a joke. Look at Sri Lanka, Andrew. They've got an economic crisis. The Chinese government's goal there is to debt trap these nations, as they've done in Sri Lanka, loan them enormous amounts of money, build them whatever they want. They can't pay it back, and then bam, they're locked in.
Yeah, the Sri Lankan example is often held up as a test case. It's a little bit more complex than that in terms of the Rajapaksa clan have been running that country for 20 years, like their personal fiefdom. They actually approached the Chinese for a financial bailout, but you're right in terms of it becomes a symbiotic relationship, Pakistan similar, where these countries become dependent on China. And of course, Sri Lanka is going off an economic cliff as we speak. People can't buy gas, they can't buy cooking oil, and they're importing rice for the first time. I would expect to see some boats coming down our way. Yep. But I think this is not so much about debt trap diplomacy. This is about China's vision to be the regional hegemon in the Indo-Pacific, put a buttress between us and the US. And you know they haven't got the world's largest navy by ship number for nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know they built with that with a reason to project power.
So it's fair to say that the previous government allowed the Pacific Island governments to get away from us. You can explain that. But here's Penny Wong on a tour of the Pacific. What chance do you give Penny Wong to offset this kind of Chinese influence?
Well, first of all, I think the previous government actually deserves a lot of credit. They've been quite active in the Pacific. We could always do more, of course. They've probably made one or two mistakes, but I think they've done a pretty good job. And the incoming government has inherited some of this new security architecture, AUKUS, the Quad, and so forth. So, and it has to be said that the coalition stood up to the coercion, and the new government has inherited from that. I think so far, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese have done a very good job. They're saying the right things. The proof of the pudding is going to be in how they compete. And we're in a competition here. We can't do it on our own. China's too big a rival. We need to work in concert with all like-minded partners. The Americans, of course, the French, the Japanese and other partners. And I think maybe there's an opportunity for a kind of Pacific Peace Corps, as it were, where we work together. We have people out in these island nations. I like Penny Wong's idea about allowing more people from the islands to come here to work and study. God knows we need people in agriculture and aged care and so forth.
Exactly.
So we've got some skin in the game.
That's the kind of soft diplomacy we need to think about. And there are numerous soft diplomatic ways that we can install. I've run out of time tonight, Andrew, but mate, thank you very much for your insight.